Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third session of Ciclo de Conversas in Design and Multimédia 2021. I'm Pedro Martins, one of the organizers of Ciclo de Conversas 2021, and I'll be sharing today's session. And for this session, our first speaker is Sofian Audry. Sofian Audry is an artist and scholar who currently teaches interactive media at the School of Media of the University of Quebec in Montreal. His computer works are inspired by artificial intelligence, artificial life, biology, and cognitive science. The computational artistic practice of Sofian Audry branches through multiple media, including robotics, interactive installations, immersive environments, physical computing interventions, internet art, and electronic literature. Thank you, Sofian. Thank you for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So let me just start. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Sofian Audry, and first I would like to thank the University of Canberra and the organizers of this event for this invitation to come and present my artistic work. So I'll just present today some of my work and thoughts about autonomous agents at the nexus of art, AI, and artificial life. So as an introduction to my work, I'll start with a short video of a recent work in progress in collaboration with Rosalie Dumont-Gagné. So let me just start. Here it is. So what is given to see here? What is the focus of the experience? Here we have a dynamic entity that behaves in the world in a way that we do not fully understand, and even us as artists don't actually completely understand or control what the system is doing. So what is it really trying to do? Does it have a goal? Or as Gilles Deleuze famously asked for von Rexkill, what is the world of that agent? So connected to this, I frame my approach, just bring this back, I frame my approach within the broader field of behavior aesthetics, which is related to cybernetics art and artificial life art. And behavior aesthetics for me originates from observing that the kind of aesthetic experience that happens in artworks where different kinds of entities evolve in real time, such as robots or other agent-based systems, is of a different kind than with other media, such as video or photography. Behaviors, unlike video loops or books, never repeat themselves. They're not fixated, yet they can somehow be recognized. So if you think about, for example, the behavior of a cat or the behavior of a friend, or even of seemingly less animate systems such as plants and bacteria. So this idea of behavior aesthetics was introduced in the early 2000s by Simon Penny as a new aesthetic field that was opened up by the possibility of cultural aesthetic interactions with such machine systems. So so most of my work is based on thinking about how to design and explore such behaviors. And in particular, I've been interested in sort of out of control, fragile, unstable agencies. So I often employ advanced artificial intelligence technologies in a way they were not intended to be used. And that's a way for me to estrange the world, to paraphrase Andreas Bruckmann. As composer Yanis Xenakis puts it, I believe that art has a capacity to reveal unnoticed aspects of the world, to sort of make appear in reality. And what I hope my work can reveal is that our technologies do not need to be instruments of control over nature or over other agents, that instead they can be imagined as more like technocultural, human, non-human hybrids. So instead of seeing technologies as powerful, precise, infallible tools, my work presents them in environments that reveal their imperfections, their instability, their fragility, even their subjectivity. In other words, their very human character. So the work you see here was created a few years ago, and it was it's size-specific work. It doesn't exist anymore. It was installed for the scope of one summer, and really in this work, I was some of my ideas really start from kind of a self challenge to myself, and I dreamed for many years of making an underwater system, an underwater installation. So I was able to make it about 10 years ago at Carleton-sur-Mer in Quebec, in near the, the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a system that has two adaptive kinds of agencies that sort of react to one another. So half of them are able to emit light, and they respond to electric impulses, changes in voltage in the water, small changes of voltage. And the other kinds of agencies do the opposite. So they react to light, and they emit a little electric current that actually creates a kind of an electric reaction in the water that generates little bubbles of hydrogen. And so this piece was really a reflection on symbiosis, equilibrium, and also the sort of the part of nature that is unseen or barely seeable. So these little bubbles, you can kind of see the agents, these systems, through a window that's made in a wharf that we built for the piece. And at night, it actually attracts local animals, jellyfish in particular, which are really populous in that area, and increasingly populous because of climate change. And so they get attracted to the light, and you sort of see these little bubbles of hydrogen, but they're really something that are more conceptual. They kind of have to know about it. And so part of the the thing that remains here, of course, is that the piece doesn't exist anymore. So the documentation of this work is what we can see now, while just thinking about this, reflecting about this sort of symbiotic alternate form of living that has these barely seeable or barely noticeable behaviors. I'm going to show you this other work, which is called Vessels, which was presented for the first time in Gijón, Spain, a number of years ago. And this is a collaboration between myself, Stephen Kelly, and Samuel Saint-Aubin. And it's a community of robots that are for the time of typically a few days are presented at night on usually on outdoors water beds in the city, but sometimes also indoors as part of the exhibition. So it's kind of a flexible work. We have it can be presented with a number of robots, could be 5, could be up to 20 robots. And they each act autonomously, and they react to their environment. So I hope the sound is okay. You can hear a little bit of what's going on. So for this project, we kind of had this idea of thinking about how we could make people think about their local environment in the city or outside of the city by looking at this proxy, by looking at these curious robots that each measure something from the environment, but the way that they represent that reading is through some kind of collective behavior, some kind of collective dance. And it turns out that actually the real spectacle of this project, at least to me, is the behavior of the humans, who, especially when it's shown outdoors, which I think is much more effective than indoors, where you get all these passersby, people walking their dogs, people coming with their kids, people just stopping to eat a sandwich near the local pond or whatever, and then just starting to look at these curious robots and trying to imagine what they're doing, and making up stories that actually often more refer to their own state of mind than to what's really happening with the robots, which is, again, quite often out of control. So it's part of my interest with so these systems use kind of a mix of approaches, including genetic algorithms. So they're adaptive, they adapt to one another, and they adapt to their environment. And this is great because for me, because I've got tired of being asked how things work in my installations, because I make these very technological works, but to me it's just my medium. It's just the way I make art. It's what I know best. But people are often more curious about how things work, what is happening, and they're looking for an explanation. So when you have these autonomous adaptive systems, now I can just say, I don't really know why they're doing what they're doing. I don't have control over them. I can only presume, even as the designer, I can't really tell. So then I can ask people, I can say, well, I don't know what they're doing. What do you think they're doing? And this is when the stories come up. So I've also been working, so I do a lot of collaborations in my own work. So not only with non-human systems, but also with other humans. It's one of the big perks of working with coding is that coding in itself, to me at least, it's not interesting just on its, it doesn't stand on its own. It becomes interesting, becomes really a behavior when it is something that is happening in the real world. And for this, this can take many forms. And in the case of this piece, Sense Factory, which was created 2 years ago with a large group of a big team of artists and designers, that was kind of one of the goals of this project, was to create this multi-sensory environment with not only behaviors, but light, sound, touch. So you had these big inflatable structures, and it's a big space where people can actually walk through the space. And it is inspired by the work of the Baja, especially the work of Moholy-Nagy. Was really thinking early on about these sort of total experiences, which would involve every aspects of the human sensory system. So just to go on, you had like it has there's light, very very bright lights, flashes, sound, touch, and also olfactory stimulations through different kinds of sort of chemical odors. So and the last, so the last one, for example, actually is a molecule that makes you cry. So as you go through this system, this environment, what we imagine, it was what became very sort of complicated was that we had to create this piece more or less remotely. Like most of the work took place, we only got together a few days before the show at the Mufathalle in Munich, and we had about a week to put it together. So how do you do that? How do you assemble all of these? How do you work with all of these people? How do you integrate all of this show together? And what we came up with was to say, okay, well, we'll imagine this whole system as an agent, or as multiple layers of agency, and think about it as kind of a digestive system, and think about like, so there's different rooms in that space, and some of the rooms, like because of the inflatable, some of the doors become closed and people can't get in, and then as soon as they can go in, they crawl in, and then they're blocked, and they're like, it's really like a completely it's really really an intense experience. And then you the element that's the most out of control actually is the visitors, who are just like running around and like laying on these inflatable things, and just crying and falling sometimes into one another. So it's kind of it's a very interesting spectacle to see once again the behavior of the visitors. But just to come back to the design of the system, this is it, is that we managed to integrate all this by, because we knew we could not plan in advance what would happen. We had no control over what the visitors would do. We didn't have time to test it really with the visitors. So we just thought about having different kinds of agencies inside the system. So for example, some of these agencies are kind of they're programmed with what I call a finite state machine. So they're not really adaptive. You have these elements that kind of like are in different kinds of states, or sometimes like they're dreaming, and then somebody, when they detect a visitor, they might wake up and then start flashing. So this all happens with flashes and sound and movements of these inflatable systems. And then at a broader level, you had these kind of adaptive, very simple adaptive, more like cybernetics actually systems that just sort of are in this constant flux, but kind of self-regulate themselves, which has the consequence that there's always kind of something happening, and it feels living, it feels alive. So to go to another sort of get out a little bit of this. So most of what I do are installations, but recently I've been interested in doing touching other stuff, including sounds. So I've made some sound pieces, and also this project, which started with an interest in an old interest of mine, actually, because I was in the early 2000s. I was trained in neural networks before neural networks became hot, and especially I had the chance to do my master's with Yoshua Bengio on language modeling with neural nets, which at the time was not considered something really interesting by most of the AI community, because these systems were just like insanely required insane computational power for the time. But nowadays it's what runs everything that is related to language models. It's just they're all based on neural nets. The most advanced things like the GPT-3 and automated translation. So anyway, I was at MIT at that time and doing a postdoc, and I was in Nick Montfort's lab, and who is a very important electronic poet. It's generative poet, and so I was in an environment, just like started to work on these generative systems, and that are able to read basically, and to understand the quote unquote understand the how a text sort of works. What are the syntactic rules and eventually maybe semantical rules that govern a text, and once so it's basically like learning the distribution of letters, and as they learn it, then they become better and better at making predictions, kind of modeling language. And typically these systems, you train them over a corpus of text, so you take like a lot of data and just train them, and once they're trained, then they're good, hopefully they become good at predicting or modeling language. And they can do so on a character by character basis. And so what I thought is that what I was interested in was not to look at their final shape or their final most efficient or optimal form. I was rather interested in attempting to unroll the learning curve. So So AI is mostly about problem solving, and machine learning techs solve problems by iteratively learning from data, starting from scratch, like I just described. And for engineers, it doesn't really matter in a way. It's kind of a means to an end. So if you had, like, in previously we had non-machine learning systems that were doing, like in the 1990s, we had non-machine learning systems that were doing a good job at this, and we didn't care much about machine learning as much. But today it seems that machine learning is what does it good best. Uh, so yeah, so for engineers, that's what counts the most. Like, it's that these are systems that are can be optimal, can be optimized. But optimization is a problem for art, because art is a domain that is specifically non-optimizable and often even non-purposeful. Like, it doesn't really it's not really useful for anything. There is no such thing as the best painting or the best movie or the best book, right? So to use machine learning in art, you have to think in alternative ways. And this is what I did with this project, is that I thought, okay, well, while this system is learning how to read a book and becoming better and better at sort of making links and understanding, let's see, as it's learning, how its behavior changes, how it's generating text. And so I took a book so by Emily Bronte, called Wuthering Heights, which is a famous book from the Anglo-Saxon literature, and I trained a deep learning recurrent neural network on the book. And as the neural net reads the book, I sort of unfolded the learning curve and then printed a series of 31 unique books. And so the idea was that if you read this book, in my mind, I was like, how can I represent this behavior in a book? So maybe the best way to read the book is to start at page 1 and just like read it, and at the end burn the book, right? Because then you would have this sort of instant or real experience of the behavior of the system. But of course, and kind of to my surprise, that's not how people read this book. Like they move from the beginning to the end, back and forth, and they explore it more as in its materiality. And I think this is what's really one of the things that is really interesting with these machine learning systems, is that they kind of turn any kind of data into a sort of a common material. So text becomes, the purpose of the text doesn't matter so much. The sense that it has in itself doesn't really matter as much as, the text as a raw material that you can explore. So what you see here in this image, there's on the left-hand side is kind of at the beginning of the book, where you see that the system, at the beginning, it's completely random, and then after a few pages, it starts to learn about spaces, because there's a lot of spaces in the text. So it kind of reveals the way that the system understands, really, or does this learning. Like, imagine you had to read, or you had I gave you a book in an alien language, and I ask you to kind of just read the book and try to understand how try to write new sentences in this weird language. And you have no point of reference. So one strategy would be, if you look in the book and you see that one character is very, very frequent, really frequently comes up, and it's kind of a good guess to say, oh, well, I think, if I write this character, it's probably, I have a good chance that it would make sense in that language. That's what the algorithm is doing at the beginning. It sees a lot of spaces, so it prints a lot of spaces. It sees a lot of vowels, like E, prints a lot of vowels. And as it goes, it starts to reduce a little, become a bit more smarter, starts to reduce the number of spacings, and starts to make small syllables and so on. And there's early on, there's this part which I really like, which is there's a glitch. There's a moment where suddenly I don't know what happened, and I never figured out exactly what I have some presumptions, but suddenly the system starts making completely random mess again, and it just goes on. So I don't know exactly, like it must at this point hit a neuron that hasn't learned yet or something. And anyway, so we in the end we printed this. So this project is available as an art book. It's 31 unique um, versions that you can actually acquire. Um, you can buy it through my website. Um, this piece was shipped 2 days ago, actually, to China. So spending the year in Shanghai. And in this piece, in collaboration with Monty Kenson, Istvan Kantor, Amen, that's one person, that's the name of my collaborator, we collected the writing of an important number of participants to the revolutionary avant-garde movement of Neoism, which in the 1980s was sort of a precursor to the network society that would be fostered by new technologies. In the late 1970s, Istvan Kantor, my collaborator, sat on a chair in downtown Montreal with a sign that said Neoism, and passersby would stop and ask, what is Neoism? And he would just say, I don't know. This is why I'm sitting here. I'd like to know what Neoism is, and then would engage in a conversation. It became like a kind of, Istvan Kantor wrote many things about Neoism. There was this artist named Monty Kenson in the 1980s, 1990s that other people would start using. So it wasn't clear always who was writing and who was intervening. And so we collected all this work and made a huge database of all the writing we could find about Neoism to try to understand maybe what Neoism is by applying artificial intelligence. And one of the principles behind Neoism is that is a principle of propaganda, salvaging, and destruction. So Istvan Kantor, for example, very often in his performances will burn one of his books because he thinks that that's what you should do with books. Once you've read them, just burn them. So that there's this constant reappropriation or this constant conversation. So we kind of tried to reproduce some of these ideas in this machine, this newest machine, and by using a similar kind of system as for the book that I showed earlier, for the Sleepers in That Quiet Earth, but this time was fully trained and optimized on the newest text. But now what the audience can do is on the front of the panel of this machine that keeps displaying text at the top, there's all these jack cables, and so it's an interactive work actually, and a participatory work where the audience can come and just like remove some of these wires, reconnect, disconnect, just change their wiring. And what happens is that it actually rewires the neural network that generates this stuff in real time. So you can you remove one cable and it actually disconnects, I don't know, like hundreds of thousands of connections. And immediately the text starts to become strange, and it creates sometimes these words that don't really exist. But and it's not clear even to me really what's happening because we don't really know. These systems are so opaque and so complicated and convoluted. It's not like one wire changes one letter, right? It's more akin to maybe a form of dementia. Like if I guess that if I would cut some of the connections in my brain right now, I would probably start speaking in really strange ways. And this is a bit what's happening here. So it's more of kind of a degrading process, but this degrading process also because these words are passing in front of your eyes, it's also kind of, you try to understand them. And so it suggests kind of new concepts sometimes, even if the words are not necessarily actual words. Since they pass in front of your eyes, kind of a way, they kind of brainwash you. They kind of, but brainwash you invertly brainwash you, because they make you think about new ideas. So I'm just gonna finish this presentation by talking to you about a few of my works in progress. So this is the work I presented earlier, Morphosis, with Rosalie Dumont-Gagné. So in this project, we start from the question, how can the learning process of a machine be experienced in real time? And how do we work with such processes as creators, as artists? For this work, we started from the following idea. We thought, okay, well, let's put a simple robot in an environment, and let's give it some goals and just train it to match these goals. And by goals here, to be very precise, we're using reinforcement learning, which means that basically we are giving the robot some kind of feedback, some kind of immediate feedback in the form of a reward or a punishment. So if it behaves in a way that is supposed to behave, we give it rewards. Otherwise, we kind of give it a punishment. It's just a number we give to the robot. And then the robot needs to autonomously make decisions. So at the beginning, it really doesn't really understand how to even move. It just can try stuff. It can move motors inside, which may make it move or not. And and then we also have our long-term plan. Where this work is supposed to be produced by the end of the summer. It has to. It was delayed because of COVID, but our end goal is to have many robots, each with a kind of a different shape, which is made with this kind of silicon skin over them. And so what you saw at the beginning was actually one of the first goals that we managed to make the robot learn, and it's very simple. It's just we give reward to the robot for being immobile, so for not moving, which is really strange because it's not interesting at all in itself. And what's funny, or what's interesting to me, at least, is that at the beginning it does move. So it starts by moving because it doesn't know how not to move, and then it needs to. So it's usually starts moving in one direction, and then after a while it starts kind of dancing and balancing on itself, which is a good strategy to not move too much. And in the end, it stops moving completely. And this is kind of the end of this. So both the beginning and so the end itself is not, when it's finished, it's boring. It becomes super boring because it just stops and it won't move anymore. But it's the process of how it achieves that. And this will also be impacted if somebody stops it in the middle of its behavior. It will not learn the same thing as it's free to move. So our goal is really to design these different kinds of behaviors. And now we have also behaviors where they're trying to move towards a target or away from a target, and we're starting to explore multi-robot behaviors this summer. And we will make a composition based on these behaviors. Another project that is also almost finished, it's a collaborative project in collaboration with Amsterdam-based artist Tez, and it's a mesoscopic lab. So between the microscopic and the microscopic, where two forms of life, one carbon-based and one computer-based, collaborate to generate some kind of a new language. So this was based actually inspired by early work of deep learning scientists such as Jeffrey Hinton, who in the early 2000s proposed ways to train generative neural nets So what we do is that we train a small neural network called an autoencoder, and we train them on simple handwritten digits from 0 to 9. And once these systems are fully trained, they're kind of strange little systems. Is that once they're fully trained, if you give them a new image in their input, they will generate the same image, so that they're auto-encoding, they're re-encoding the image. So it's kind of weird in a way, but the idea is that these neural networks, you put less neurons in the middle, so you kind of force them to find a way to compress this information, so to find irregularity in the data. And what happens is that, and you can see it in the left top left image, which was based on one article that was really inspiring to us. If you give them a number, they will produce the number. But if you give them something else, like noise or some other image, they'll still produce something. They'll still output something. And they'll output something that's gonna look like a weird shape. And if you take that shape and put it again back into the system and repeat the procedure, it starts generating these strange forms that have some qualities of digits, but are not digits. And we thought, okay, well, why don't we find a way to connect them with actual life forms? So we use Euglena gracilis, which are unicellular beings that have unique properties, which makes them stand sort of in between the animal and the plant kingdom, because they are considered to be algae, but they also have a flagella, so they can move. So they're also considered protists, and they're phototaxic. So they have a unique photocell that allows them to detect sources of light, and they if you get the right kind of light, they will actually move towards the light. And if they're concentrated enough, you can actually see it with the naked eye. Hence the idea of the mesoscopic light. So you can actually see it. And so they will take, they kind of act as a living photographic substrate. So what we do is that we create this feedback loop where we take an image from the colony on the Petri dish, project it into the autoencoder. The autoencoder will generate a new image. Then we project that image back on the colony. And by repeating this process, it starts to converge eventually to different kinds of shapes. And this is some samples of what it produces, these kinds of living strange alphabet that appear on the Petri dish. So for me, what I find interesting with this project is like it's really open-ended, and it makes you think about how we come up with language through perception, and how these two things are interconnected, and how this is a living process that is far from being a situation where, you know, we are just looking at the world and representing and turning it into symbol. There is a feedback loop involved where we come up with these symbols like words that are directly embedded with this perceptive and cognitive process. So one of my long-term goals is to create post-humanist and feminist alternative AI systems that address the hegemony of AI as a dualistic, human-centric technological construct. So this last project I'm showing is a new project with artist RNG that fits into this endeavor. And here we're using recordings of images and biodata from method actress Laurence Dauphinet. And we train a generative neural net to produce a latent space of the emotionscape of the actress. And the idea is that the participant would then be able to navigate or explore this emotional space through their own emotions as measured by their own biosignals. You can imagine someone who would be hooked into biosensors and seeing different kinds of hybrid emotional states and liminal states, sort of some things, sometimes happiness, sometimes sadness, but what about something that's kind of in between those two states? And so we want through this to create a system of artificial emotion or artificial empathy as a critique of contemporary cultures of AI through this feedback loop of effective human and machine performance. And so this is some samples of different kinds of emotional states that you could see. And yes, you can see some of these states are kind of really glitchy or in between emotional states. So to finish, beyond my own artistic work, I also do research in the field of new media art, and I am especially interested in how artists make use of AI technologies as part of their practice. So to finish, I would like to announce my upcoming book at the MIT Press, Art in the Age of Machine Learning, where I examine how machine learning art and its practice in new media art and music and literature. So I discussed some of the questions about adaptive behaviors that I'm working with on my own creative work, but also looking at the work of other artists. The book has a foreword from eminent deep learning researcher Yoshua Bengio and 40 images, including beautiful diagrams realized by my peer Jean-François Renaud, with whom I also share a common interest for generative systems and creative coding and the open source environment processing. So the book will be available in October 2021, and I hope you get a copy. And if you are interested in art practice and AI and artificial life and machine learning, I think you will really enjoy it. Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you. Thank you, Sofian. Congratulations on your work. We now move on to our second speaker, Kaffe Matthews. Kaffe Matthews is a pioneering music maker, works with space, data, things, and place to make new electroacoustic compositions. The physical experience of music for the maker and listener has always been central to her approach, and to this end, she has invented some unique interfaces, such as the sonic armchair, the sonic bed, or the sonic bike. These sonic interfaces not only enable new approaches to composition for makers, but give immediate ways into unfamiliar sound and music for a wide-ranging audience. Kaffe is in Coimbra, working on the sonic bikes that will be presented at the Darovid Festival. It's a sound art festival, which will be held here in Coimbra from the 10th of July to the 5th of September. Kaffe, thank you for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pedro. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Sofian. Really, really interesting to hear about your work. I feel actually that we have a lot of crossovers, even though my approach to working with, well, because I work with live systems and life, but not using artificial intelligence, for example. So I think we could have an interesting discussion later on. Yeah, it's very good to be in Coimbra. It has to be one of the most difficult cities to work in to make a sonic bike composition, but I'll talk about that later. So I think I should just dive straight in and tell you very briefly about my work and how it all began, because the way that Pedro talked about the interfaces that I've made, I suppose that essentially for me, one of the most important things about music making has been about the experience of it for the listener or the audience. Okay, so very briefly, I began as a musician, a violinist, and I got interested in electronics, basically because I wanted to be able to access sound material that was nothing like the violin. It took me a few years to realize that I don't actually really like the violin as a sound, but what I loved was the physical gesture of playing it. And so returning to violin playing in my early 20s, playing in a band and starting to amplify it and work with effects and so on. It then took me into the world of MIDI and a live sampling system I discovered called Lisa at Stime in Amsterdam, where actually, Sofian, I met Tez. It was great to hear that you're working with him. Anyway, so the thing as well, I suppose, about making this music that was really important that I feel is worth mentioning now is the fact that I was working with the violin. Okay, there was this gesture, but what else are you doing as a violinist? You've got this vibrating wooden box under your chin, it nestles here. If you grip it too tightly, the box doesn't vibrate very well. You know, so it's very much about the act of playing it and all these subliminal other things that are going on that you're not fully aware of when you're actually doing it. Me as well as the player, I am also experiencing the violin in a way that an audience won't. I have here, you know, and I'm getting this other physicality that communicates. Anyway, years later, I suppose by about the late 90s, I was working with this live sampling system, and I was making concerts where I would improvise, but I would always have a microphone somewhere in the space or elsewhere outside of the space to be able to bring in random sound material, and also to, as the years went, able to work more specifically with the acoustic of that. So the act of making music was very much about with this moment. So what are these things that kind of contributes to the live moment? A, of course, it's the space. B, it's the sound material that you're playing. C, it's who's the audience? What time of day are you playing? Ah, it's saying my internet connection is stable. Can you still hear me? Is it okay? Yes, somebody wave. Thanks. Thanks, the person with the mask. You don't have to wear a mask, actually, maybe, or maybe you do. Anyway, so yeah, so in a space, there's the audience, and if you're playing at 4 in the morning in a snowy underground, or 5 in the afternoon in a church, you as a player and the audience are in very different states. You will receive the music in a very different way. Of course, there are practical things like the sound system and what the sound material is, but this incalculable response that humans have to sound, which is very much more through their bodies than just their ears, was something that I realized I wanted to work with. This was by then it was about 2005, and I had made a practice. Well, I had a record label. I was releasing CDs, Annetteworks.com. I released like 6 solo CDs. I was doing lots of concerts, touring all the time. And by about 2004, 2005, I thought, actually, I need to stop. Let's get off this stage. Let's come out of this kind of privileged or elitist small scene of artists and musicians who are making experimental electronic music. The audience was largely white, largely young, largely and often these people were also very interested, or they were making this kind of music themselves or producing it. And I'm like, what about all the people on the street? Okay, you know, what about the normal people? And so the sonic armchair was something that I developed or made as an interface for an installation that I was doing with an artist in Scotland, Mandy McIntosh, who I've worked with a lot. And I realized actually that old women and children would queue to have a ride in this sonic armchair. And actually, if they had realized what the recording was, what the music was, that if I had played this sound to them through a pair of speakers, they would have gone, hang on, this is weird noise, what are you doing? Where's the tune? But people could relate to this. And so what's happening is going through the body. And so then the sonic bed appeared as my response to a commission I received from a gallery in London in 2005. And by chance, actually, I've never seen this before. This morning, I found a video online of me talking about the sonic bed, and I explain it. And so let's just very quickly have a look at this. By the way, are you seeing this image of the sonic bed? Yes. No. Yes. Is my screen shared? Share screen. Oh, share screen. Are you now seeing? I've lost you. Share. Okay, everybody, are you now seeing this image? Yes, excellent, thank you. Okay, so this is the Sonic Bed, the original. This was 2006. Wrong, 2005. And let me just immediately play you this video. Sorry, one second. I come and go with how good I am about screen sharing, and I think I have. Okay, here we go. Let's play this. Do you hear it? This is Sonic Bed London. And it's part of a collective music project called Music for Bodies. I'm essentially looking at ways of enjoying new experimental music through your body rather than just through your ears. And I made a couple of sonic armchairs, and I realized that old women and kids would queue for an hour to have a ride in a sonic armchair, and the music that it was playing would basically be a processed recording of the inside of an aeroplane. But if you played that music to them through speakers, they'd say, you know, give me a break, love, where's the tune? So I realized that there was something in using the body as a listening interface. So the bed has got 6 subwoofers under the mattress and 8 mids and tweeters in panels around the side. And the music that I make is about space and architecture and sculpture. So the sounds move up and down your body and spin around, and they're shifting against each other all the time. And the sound for this piece, I used a theremin. So I'm working with specific frequencies that I locate at specific parts of the body. And then I use the map of the human body, if you like, as my score. And the particular frequencies that I use are the ones that people have said, you know, they're the hot ones. So sometimes you'll come and it's quite chilled out, and other times it'll be a bit of a blast, you know? Okay, so obviously that is nothing like the sound of the Sonic Bed. And this also cannot replace what the Sonic Bed is all about. But I will just briefly play you a stereo extract of the composition that was said. So bear in mind that there are sub-bass frequencies that are moving up and down your body, and the high frequencies move in different ways as well through a 12-channel sound system. I stopped that sooner than I intended. I'm very now. I hope. I mean, ideally, you should all be listening through headphones that have decent bass response, or through a massive sound system in your house. I think one of the first things that interests me now is the fact that how slow it is. And I think that I was just extremely interested in listening. I think ultimately that's what my work has always been about. It's been about, or what I'm looking for is inspiring people to actually engage with sound and music. And I also call this music, and I see myself very much as a composer, if you like, or the word sound artist is used much more these days. And that essentially what the sonic bed is, it's an instrument. And having made this thing, you know how it is, you have an idea, you make a project, you get it ready just in time for the opening, and it's all really freaky. And then you go, oh, Christ, you know, it does more than I anticipated. Which is why it's kind of, you know, disappointing to not be able to really talk about it. Actually, I mean, play it to you. Sofian, interestingly, actually, if you're, I think, are you in Quebec City or in Montreal? Anyway, I actually made a sonic bed in Montreal, and it still is in, no, sorry, I made it in Quebec City. And it's actually still there somewhere in a cupboard. Because having realized that this sonic bed was a beast of many possibilities, the obvious thing to me is to actually set up a collective around the idea, and to research it with other people. You know, collaboration, I think, absolutely is like the way forward now in terms of making, I'm going to use the word responsible art. I suppose I feel art that actually does something creative for people who receive it, as well as for the people who make it, so that it communicates something that inspires people to act and learn and be alive, you know, and maybe do things themselves. So the idea behind the sonic bed, I then set up this collective called Music for Bodies. It's musicforbodies.net. You'll find it online, where all the beds that I then proceeded to make, which ultimately used the design of this first one. But then I went and made a sonic bed in Taipei and in Shanghai and in Quebec City and in Marfa in Texas, Scotland, you know, like half a dozen were made. And by the way, actually, I'm going to say right now that if anybody is interested in having a sonic bed in a place where they could compose for it, where other people could make music for it, give me a shout, because currently, what with COVID and everything, there are now 3 sonic beds sitting in storage, not doing anything, and they're kind of going to start to rot. So please get in touch or spread the word. Remember that thought, spread it around. Okay, so anyway, that's the sonic bed. And musicforbodies.net carried on, and I worked with an architect and a programmer, because this was also my first dive into working with Max MSP, because also I was, apart from wanting to make interfaces, my other compositional desire, if you like, was to make music that was non-linear. So music that had no beginning, and it was more like thinking about it existing as geological layers, you know, so that it's something that it was always present, these different layers interacting with each other in different ways, but that you as the listener could dive in and out at different moments. So you would get different experiences of these different layers doing different things between each other. And that's also how the compositions in the sonic beds work. There's no looping going on. There is a load of sound files, each one organized in different folders, each one with a particular trace. In other words, a movement is attached to a movement file of different speakers, so that each time it plays, it recombines in different ways. So these different beds that have been made are also available for other people to make compositions for. And this is also what happened with the bed that I made in Quebec City, for example. other people in Quebec City came a year later and made compositions for it. John Oswald and Mags. Oh, I can't remember people's names. It's so long ago. Anyway, and then also to a space in Montreal. Anyway, let's move on from the sonic beds and go to the sonic bike. So what was the next thing with the sonic beds? Yes, they're great. I was working intensely with the body, with actual feeling, running experiments, getting different people in the studio, seeing how they responded to different frequencies in different parts of the body, making compositions in response to that. But it was inside, and I was able to make work outside, directly in the public. And first of all, I thought, well, I don't want to put speakers in trees, in parks. I want to, what about using bicycles? So first of all, I worked with radio, and I ran an FM station from my studio for a week through a public art commission in 2002. And a community center where anyone could come learn how to use kit to record stuff and anything. And the response I got ranged from the local rapping scene got to hear about it. A couple of old women who worked on the market came and did things. A young guy who made intense guitar music. So we had all these different kinds of things, sound sources and different people. And then we would stream this work from the library back to my studio and broadcast it FM. So this was 2002. So you have to understand, of course, that it was slow tech, digital communications. And the FM station was run with London. You had to buy community radio license, another discussion, which, because it was an art commission, it had to be paid for, it had to be legal. So, it was walking into this wild world of pirate radio in London as well, because that was like London at the time had the biggest pirate radio station going on, especially the weekend. But the idea developed from radio and then get people to cycle bicycles along specific streets with a small radio attached to their handlebars. It moved on to working with GPS. So that was basically the creation of the sonic bike. And what you're seeing here is, this was in Ghent, and the first set of updated sonic bikes, if you like, that I made. The first lot were made in Folkestone on the south coast of the UK for the Folkestone Triennial in 2012. And then 2008. And then in 2012, I was invited to Ghent to work with TimeLab, fantastic setup. And I used these speakers, which essentially were the best kind of bookshelf speakers I could find that had a decent bass. They actually responded well at 70 hertz. And again, you're walking into a world of having to build things, build hardware. You might think, easy, pair of speakers on a bicycle, easy. But actually the reality of getting decent stereo off a bicycle so that you've got speakers that are secure, that don't affect the cyclist. You don't want them on the handlebars. You've got to have a bar to mount them. And then, how are you running it? So this is the basic tech of the system. My idea at the beginning also was really important that this thing was not an app. Okay, so the box on the back of the bike, which would be here, this is the box on the back of the bike. The very first set of sonic bikes carried a 12-volt lead acid battery and a car amplifier. If you want to use decent real audio and you're on a budget, or you don't have aux cabinet driven speakers use car audio, even though you're running on 12 volts, which is now not so much of a problem. You will find you can get really good audio response for not that much money. But my idea was that this box was seen, I suppose I conceived of it as being like a bit of a lunchbox, or a picnic basket, so that you're independent of the internet, you're not being tracked or traced. Yes, it uses GPS, so maybe, but there's no app involved, okay? So it's an independent bit of software that we made. I say we, again, another collective of artists and coders grew out of this idea. Let me just say as well that right now on this bicycle, there's a little subwoofer here. That's what this missile looking thing is. It sits under the seat, so you get a bit of a under your seat, and a Raspberry Pi. These speakers now, we're using mini rig speakers, which are made in the UK. So with a pair of these little speakers at the front and this sub at the back, the rider is actually sitting within this sound system. It's quite carefully set up. The original system with that yellow bike, with the yellow speakers, they are like bang at you. So you, the rider, are totally like immersed in this stereo sound field, which when I was first doing this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to take the audio from the street away, and I wanted to give people the visual experience of being somewhere, cycling around and hearing this music and where they were going, because the GPS receiver located them. And the soft that we made was basically a bit of, it used a mapping system whereby me or anyone who was making a piece for a sonic bike could draw all these different colored things around here. They are zones, and you can layer several different ones and then assign a different sound file to them. So that's basically how the system works. You can, of course, then assign different parameters to different zones, so that the audio file might play from a collection of other files rather than always play the same one. It might play backwards, it might play only while you're in the zone, and stop as soon as you leave, or it might continue to play for its duration and things like this. So there were all these different kinds of parameters, and meant, of course, that the rider had controlled what they would hear. And again, with this project, it evolved from an idea into another collective, which I called the Microphonic Research Institute. And just very quickly, I'm just going to play you a project from one of, let's play this one. I'm going to play you a clip from, you've got to leave bloody full screen, that's it. Okay, so let's have this. So this piece, which I made in Dublin, Slip to Bang. It was a collaboration with Mia Gallagher, who is an author. And I think that one of the things about these sonic bike compositions, it's, as you may have gathered from what I was saying at the beginning about my starting and concerts and responding very much to the space that I'm performing in, this sonic bike work is absolutely about the context. It's absolutely about where you are. This is why I'm in Coimbra right now, because this piece I'm going to make, that will open here on July 10th. And I have no idea what I'm going to make until I come to a place. And when you get there, you get to feel it, and then you make a piece in response in various different ways. This piece in Dublin was the collaboration with the author. I think I'm always as well politically motivated in some way or another. And this composition I made, and I asked to work with Mia because she works at the time with ex-heroin addicts. Heroin is a massive problem in Dublin, and actually how the city are dealing with it is actually really productive. It's really moved on. And so I met her and recorded her reading a lot of the book. We edited it, and then I made this piece, which essentially is her telling some of this work through the streets. Anyway, I'll just play you a bit. Bring me this, bring me that, bring me a set. Oh no. No. This was playing beautifully. China dogs made in 1795 with floppy brown ears on their bellies. It's a wine jug with a carb. Bring me a velvet, old fashioned. Why? You look down at your combat jacket, still no shadow. It's for you hate all that. And pull something off it. It's a hair, brittle. Stretch it between your fingers and watch it snap. Why? Everything has its fun. Oh yeah, what you give me, I have to pay for. But I'm okay. I got it under control. I'm not desperate. Like whatever sad junkies you and snags got working for years on the streets, selling and running and buying and paying and catching and fetching and dodging and scamming. I'm not selling my body to buy off you, nor queuing outside manky drop-offs under the copper's cold gaze to pay over the odds for shite gear cut with glucose and polyfiller 10 times over. Nor am I running from pillar to post, from the square to the Don Snooker Hall of the keys and back, just because someone says supplies are short. I got it easy. I roll up whenever it's safe, meaning whenever snagged and sashanted around, and with whatever you've asked me to bring, and then I smoke, you watching, and I breathe and chill, and maybe we chat, and then I go home and I wait for the next month. I'm sorted. I have socialist still calling it regular, so I can't let stuff show. I'm not like Nico, dying for his visits from the ice cream man, upping his fix from a 10 to a 40, his daily from once to 5 times. No everyday pangs of hunger for Lucy Dolan. Though I think about it, yeah, sometimes sure I do, but that's natural, isn't it? Looking forward to it. I'm a weekend user, me. That slagging term, I am happy to own it. Though I wouldn't call myself a user, no. And anyways, I'm only smoking it. I got it under control. Okay, so sorry about the internet pauses then. Just to say that what we were listening to just then, and obviously it's recorded from the bicycle. Aha, we don't want you yet, sweetie. This piece actually ran here under this bridge and then up here, and this is where there's been a lot walking around in suits at lunchtime. So, you know, putting music on a bicycle in a situation like that, it utterly transforms it for the ride, the passing public, I suppose. just very briefly as well, that the Bikephonic Research Institute, I think I've made about 14 or so of these different projects in different cities around the world, and each one is really different. This one is actually has got quite a narrative going on, which is quite unusual. And it will be interesting to see what happens in Coimbra, figuring it out. Okay, so we also, the Bikephonic Research Institute, I'm actually going to quickly say, yes, the Bikephonic is a word that I kind of made up, actually. You know, it's one of those words that happened. And I discovered that Google thinks that it's a typo. So that was quite nice. Adopted the word. And it's a research project set up with Dave Griffiths, who is one of the original coders that I worked with in the very early days. But I'll tell you more about the Bikephonic Research Institute in a moment. Anyway, so obviously there is a problem with sonic bikes. They're very ist, you know, they're very ableist. Lots of people can't ride bikes or don't want to ride bikes. And so we've also made some other kinds. This is kids' bike, obviously, trike, kid trike. Yeah, and this was in Texas, making a load of sonic bikes in Texas. So another idea with the project is that we set up these different hubs of sonic bike activity all over the world, and there's 8 of these sonic bikes in Houston that are doing their own independent projects over there. Like I said, all the software is open source. We share all the code. It's all online. And this guy here, actually, he works for NASA as his day job. So to work with him to actually get this tech going was amazing. It was like Bing, everything worked straight away, and it was kind of developed, you know. And then let's come up a bit further forward. This is 2016, and this is what I call sensory bicycle. I had a professorship at TU in Berlin, and I was invited to go and be a professor of bikerophonics. And what I wanted to do at the time was to actually give the rider more control over the audio. In other words, put sensors on the bike so that the cyclist could control, rather than the bicycle just being a playback system. Okay, the audio really changes if you ride very fast, if you leave the route where the piece is mapped, you know, if you stop, things like this. And yes, if you do ride very fast, you can get quite a different experience depending on the piece. But it's largely a playback system. So I've always been interested, as have some of the people I work with, in the possibility of putting sensors on the bike so that the cyclist can actually play the sound. So this is what Sensory Bike did, and this is a small lunchbox which has got the updated soft in it, working with Sikander Katardinata, who's an engineer and science and musician living in Berlin, again, who I've known since Stein days, which is quite nice. So for example, here, this is the bike upside down. There's a teensy in there. And what we're doing is the cyclist can actually change the direction of play of the sound by cycling forwards or backwards. And they can also actually, ultimately, they can granulate the sound by how fast they ride. So that was a lot of fun to play with up on the handlebars. We had the brakes would change a filter, and there was also another sensor that, what else was the other one on the brakes? Suddenly, there was another one that by turning right or left, you were filtering, you were changing the volume of the sound, actually. So that was a lot of fun. And then the score map made for these pieces are quite different, because it was like, how do you actually do this? Because giving somebody a sensory bike and sending them off on the street is actually really dangerous, because when you're riding it, you start to have such fun that you forget about the traffic. So you can't let anybody out on the road with that. So the solution was to actually make pieces that, for example, rode through areas where you could circle about. This was a skateboard park down here actually, and up here in this long green area there was a park. This is by the Nordbahnhof for anyone who knows Berlin. Basically when you entered in this park, this synthesizer starts to play, and you, by riding the bike, were playing synth. And now let's come right up to now, which is my current passion of sonic biking. The latest creation, if you like, is this, which is the environmental bike. And basically it is a sonic bike with an air pollution sensor here on the handlebars. And that carries a laser, and it's measuring, it's got little nostrils here. So it's as you ride along, it's actually breathing the air in and out, and reading 11 different streams of data. And it's live sonifying this data into something that the reader might understand. Now, I don't know if any of you out there work with live sonification. If you do, you know it's a black hole. Complications. It can be absolutely horrible. But I think there are also other questions for the maker, for the artist, the composer, the person writing. Is, do the riders need to understand what the air pollution is doing? Do they need to understand that by hearing the sound that it's more or less polluted? Are they riding along? What actually was the idea? I think essentially for me, what it was really about at the beginning, Harry, was, you know, it was like going right back to my early days of sonic biking. I began with radio. You know, I'm still super interested in radio, and I don't mean online radio. I mean FM radio. I mean, you know, electromagnetic waves here. You know, like air. This is our medium. This is what our sound people work with. You know, this is what we all live in. It's ultimately the thing that allows us. And there's so much more going on in it than we can end. And the physicality of this very airspace is something that still completely fascinates me. And this is why I began to think about what would happen to people riding bicycles if they were made aware, more aware, or rather, what would happen to people's listening experience riding a bicycle if they were made aware of the airspace around them, you know? So how about if you read the air pollution, and I'm going to add in, not obviously, but yes, I'm very involved and concerned about climate change and so on. In a lot of my work, I've tackled this in different ways. And so could we, by actually inviting cyclists or anyone to ride a bicycle that was actually going to give them some kind of audio response as to what the air was, as to what was in the air that they were riding through, what would that do to their engagement with where they were, you know, with their locality, with their actual experience of moving through air? And so that was the one question. And then, of course, the other thing is how would they listen differently? You know, what would happen? And so we made the environmental bike, this thing. It was also inspired by work that I did with Phone Care Now, who are also a collector in the south of England. This is Dave Griffiths again, who I set up the Bikephonic Research Institute with. Him and his wife have this fantastic setup down there, and I have worked with them on one of their ideas, which was a development of the sonic bike, if you like, and it was a sonic kayak. Amber's a scientist, and they are looking very much at being able to create a system that scientists can use to gather estuarine data. They were actually wanting to look at water pollution, specifically around coasts. And believe it or not, it's something that's really not stored or gathered as data. So that was where this whole working with environmental sensor journey began. So working with them on that in, I think it was 2018, we then moved on. I was then like, hey, what about a bike, the red air pollution? Let's do that. So we did, and we launched it at the a festival in Lisbon. Actually, funny enough, suddenly all this Portuguese work going on. Yes, Portugal is a country very close to my heart. So here we are. Yeah, let's in fact. So this is here we have the environmental bike, and I think that the launch that we made of it. Let's actually pop through to here for a sec. Where is it? Here we go. So this was us in Lisbon. And of course, the reality, as I mentioned, about live sonification is that it can be very difficult to actually get something that A, is bearable to listen to, and B, can respond to the wide range of data. And actually, again, we had just made this system, and we're running a lab in Lisbon at this festival, Lisboa Soa. I'm sure a lot of you here in Coimbra will know of it. And rather than it being a normal sonic bike piece where the sonic bikes will go to a city and they will stay in that city for 2 or 3 months, all the bikes will be in a space where the public can come and take out a bike and ride through the streets and hear a piece unfold. So it's very much kind of installation or a performance kind of thing. This launch of the environmental bike we ran a lab. We were there for a week and basically developing the sonification patches while we were there, and just logging people's responses to what happened and showing people where they had ridden, and listening to, we were showing people where they had ridden by also visualizing the data of their ride. And it was absolutely fascinating because people were delighted and thrilled, and all kinds of people then came to start to ride the bikes and get engaged in the sound in a way that does not normally happen with sonic biking. People wanted to ride around and find out, they wanted to go and explore, and we're just like suddenly super concerned about their local airspace. Anyway, I'll just very briefly play this, if it's going to play. Oh no. Sorry, everyone. I thought I could get away without. Let's see how well it's going to work. Okay. As we're running out of time anyway, I think I'm gonna pause that, and I'll just show you. Look, check this link. In fact, this is the Biophonic Research Institute website. I don't know what's happened to the internet here. It was all fine a few hours ago. Yeah. I think there's a concert going on downstairs, so maybe a lot of people are in the house. But all the projects, look, here we are. All the projects that I mentioned, they're all listed in here, and you'll find out the sonic bike, environmental bike. Yeah, no, it's really slowed right down. Apologies. What I just wanted to show you was the data, what we actually show people. So people from their ride, and then we can actually show them a route of where they've been, and you can see the pollution levels. This is the sonic bike box on the back, and here we're also to show what the data is doing. And we literally are this whole system going now, busy winter. And now we've got some funding from Berlin to develop the sonification approach. This was air pollution in Lisbon, which you're about to see. So we've got some funding in Berlin to actually develop the sonification systems for the bikes. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to kind of give the internet. There's just one thing. Let's play this. We'll do a little sound up because this was. And recording air pollution in Berlin. This was in January when it was really cold and foggy and humid. And I had no idea that the air pollution in Berlin is really polluted. So I was recording data on the bike, would come back in and was then using the data to work with different kinds of sound material and develop the sonification patches that we're using. We're using pure data at the moment, which has its limits, but we're running on a Raspberry Pi, possibility to move over to Super Collider. But this, for example, is a little us with, because I ended up calling it lockdown dancing, because it's literally the air pollution playing, the air pollution of that particularly miserable peak of lockdown moment in Berlin, when you can't see anyone and there are no more parties anymore. And we made this. I think that that to hear on a bike is a hell of a lot of fun, and it did, it did the job, and it also kind of inspired me to push on with the whole possibility of working with this new instrument, I suppose. Anyway, I think I should stop there right now, although I'm briefly going to add that the piece, this festival, I can't remember what it's called, that I'm making the piece for. And the bikes will be located at Oficina, which is on Rua do Almoço, opening on the 10th of July. 10th of July, just log that date in your head, because there'll be a great opening party, I can assure you, outside Salão, Brazil. And I'm still looking, I'm still gathering and figuring out a concept for this piece. So hopefully by the time, we see each other in July, there'll be something worth riding around to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaffe. Thank you. The name of the street is Rua do Almoxarife. It's a tricky name. Almoxarife. And the festival, yes. Almoxarife, it's a tricky one. And the name of the festival is Dar Ouvir. It's a sound art festival, which will be held in Coimbra. We are running out of time, but we have time for a couple of questions. And there's a question from Sarah Seixas, a question for Audry. Sofian, Audry, what do you think is the biggest drawback of AI? Algorithmic bias caused by bad data, privacy violation, or socioeconomic inequality? What do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that the fundamental problem with AI is that it's developed as part of this. It's anchored in a very dualistic, patriarchal, capitalistic framework that is not that is really still thinking about trying to extract power from minds or form and that thinks about the world as a complex machine, and that thinks about societies as just a bunch of individuals that interact and where power can be harnessed. And I think that and the even bigger problem is that people don't really understand AI, and the way it's being communicated is it's been communicating by a big industry, a growing industry, the big ITs that is completely unregulated and that do not want to be regulated. So I think for me, like the thing that embodies this is the fact that if you look at these industries, a number of them have branches. So all of these, like Google and Facebook, they have all of these ethics branch. Where and it's typically not it's not the big branch. It's like a small branch of the company has this ethics or this cultural branch, and they call it AI for good. And I think this just summarizes the issue we have. If a company has a branch called AI for good, what does the rest of the company do? I mean, like, I don't know, if I'm a prof at the university, if I was in a department that was education for good, then what would the rest of the university do, right? So I think this is the fundamental problem. I mean, yes, these algorithms are biased, of course. Why wouldn't they? Well, we are biased. They're not like they're, so but it's the companies, it's the way that this is done that is a problem, and not so much the technologies on their own. Although I do think, and that's what I was thinking a bit about, is that I also think that it is all embedded and all related. And just to complete, I think one of the things that I find very interesting, and this actually will segue into the second question, which was about humanizing social interesting, is that I think one thing that I find very interesting with these technologies is that at the opposite, machine learning, opposite to traditional coding, is much more of a experimental science kind of practice. Like you have to go with trial and error. And so it's less of a top-down, it's more of a bottom-up approach. And I think this has a lot of potential if we can use it to reconnect to the body and to reconnect to experience. And I think, this is, I find it very exciting actually to see your presentation, Kaffe, because I was looking at, for example, these approaches to experience pollution in a city. And I think this is much more effective because it's I mean, like than trying to model like we have the science, for example, to understand climate change, to understand pollution, but nothing happens because it's not a scientific problem, it's a political, it's a cultural issue. So to give power back, to bring things back, bring the technology back to the body, to experience, I think this is really the way to go for me to be able to reconnect with the world rather than having technologies that separate us from the world.
Thank you, Sofian. We have a question for Kaffe from Rui Brandão. He asks, do you think that interaction with people is essential for sound design in the matter of looking for feelings that sounds can provoke?
I'm rather confused by that question. I mean, do you mean in the making, in the making of the sound design, in the actual design of the sound system, or the creation of the sound? You see what I'm saying? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
fully understand the question.
maybe it's related to the creation.
Yes. Certainly for me, it's this. I think this has been one of the things. Yeah, okay, I'll take that question about interaction with people. I think that I always start in a way which is my design tends to be functional initially. So the design, for example, of the sonic bed was completely functional in terms of the sound system needs to be like this in order to get as close to a lying body as this. And also practical, because why am I working with the lying body rather than the sitting up body in a bed, for example, is because where do we feel frequencies really largely below 100 hertz, 100 hertz and below. That's where we start to really feel it. And then, of course, you get into territories where you can't hear it at all, and you can do all kinds of things to your lying bodies. I actually avoided that territory, although there was an interesting experience with ghosts and ghost frequencies for a while. But then the actual audio material that's produced, yes, so the actual sound design, if you like. This was one of the fascinating things about the Music for Bodies project right at the very beginning, was actually inviting people into the studio and working with them and like running sessions. So it even got to a point where I would do installations, you know, the sonic bed would sit in a gallery running a piece that would change all the time every day for months. And then I might go in for like 2 or 3 days and run sessions, and I do one-to-one sessions. So somebody could come and lie in the bed and I would play for them. Which was really interesting because they would never say anything. I would just play, and they would get, and then we would talk afterwards. And it was always fascinating what would happen. The other thing is, I worked with a woman who was deaf, or she was impaired in her hearing. And she and I actually made a piece that was very much determined by her. Which was a fascinating thing to do. So yes, so this two-way process really moved on my whole approach to being able to work with, for example, different frequencies in different parts of the body as a way of producing a composition. And actually, ultimately, it's still something I would love to do, is work, for example, with a shiatsu masseuse or something like that, somebody who actually works very specifically with different kind of energy flows. But at the same time, I've avoided doing that because then you start to get into this healing thing. And even though the bed does do healing, doesn't music do healing? You know, music is healing in some way or another. It certainly has this massive power to bang, immediately change every sense of how you're feeling and when you first turn it on, depending on how you listen to it, of course. So yes, is the answer. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I'll close this session with a comment made by João Neves on YouTube about Kaffe's work. Very inspiring work. Maybe we could have a sonic bed in our university department, since some of them are gathering dust. Okay, that's a good idea, João. It's a good idea.
Let's arrange it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your talks. We are closing this session. Next Wednesday, we'll have another session of Ciclo de Conversas with 2 talks, one by Kaffe, a designer, researcher, and artist and musician from Turkey, and Duke Tudela, a new media artist. So see you next Wednesday. Thank you.